Hey everyone, this is Jeff Weinberger with K2 Music, and I'd like to continue our lessons in string bending on the electric guitar. The last subject I want to talk about today is reverse bending, compound bending, which is something you hear a lot of country players do, and also we have something called unison bends. And let's get right to it. So reverse bending is exactly what it sounds like. You have a note. Let me switch to a clean sound here for a second. Alright, so you have a note that you've already bent. You've pre-bent it, and you sort of have to guess where the note is. This isn't something that you can hear. You can't tell, but you just by instinct and by ear, you know about how much to push that string to have it in tune. And we just start with our note bent and then pick the string and let it down. You've heard that, like the beginning of that song Wild Thing. That's the first note in Wild Things. If they do it in B flat. I did it a half step down in A. That is a reverse bend. It sounds like a cat meowing or something like that. And you just have to simply practice it a lot to get good at exactly where should I be, how far should I have it bent to be in tune. You could use a tuner perhaps to check that. You can just use your ear. In this case, again, this is my note G that I used in the previous lessons being bent up a whole step to the note A. And let go and released back down to its original pitch of G. Of course, you can do this with other pitches. You could do a half step, whole step, half step, more than a whole step. Like an Albert King bend or a Stevie Ray Vaughan bend where they bend more than a whole step, even 1.5 to 2 steps. You're practically breaking the string. So it can be pretty expressive. So that's a reverse bend. Next, I'd like to talk about unison bends, a really common technique. Get some distortion going again. You probably all heard Jimi Hendrix do this, countless other players like Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath. I'll just play one rather than talk about it. Let's listen to what a unison bend is like. So what that's all about, it's produced by doing bending just like we talked about before in the previous video, but this time I'm holding down a version of the note that I'm bending to. So in this case I have a note F sharp, and I'm taking the note E and bending it up to F sharp and playing them both exactly at the same time. So when you hear two of the same note at the same time, that's called a unison. A little bit of music theory. But unison bends are this sound. You've all heard them before. See, I add a little vibrato to it too from the previous lesson. So unison bending with some vibrato. Is unison bending on this pair of strings, which is different. We know that we tune this pair of strings differently from this pair of strings. So look how far apart my fingers are now. Instead of 2 frets like on this pair of strings, the G string and the B string, now we have 2 frets between our fingers on the B string and the E string. So unison bends on your thinnest strings. Unison bends just half steps apart. Maybe with some pick raking like we talked about earlier. You can combine all of these techniques. Last but not least, I did want to talk about compound bends a little bit. Here's a clean sound. Compound bend is when you play a note that you bend and then you play another note along with it to get a harmony like this. You've heard that in country music, Leonard Skinner, Allman Brothers. Here it is on a different pair of strings. And then finally, here it is with 2 notes together with the bend. We're going to hear a grand total of 3 notes all together. Two notes staying still and 1 note being bent. Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, another guy that uses that technique. And one last little country bend for you. Here we go. And that's a compound bend where I bend, grab a note on a different string, bend, grab a different note, Bend again, grab a different note. It can be any notes you want. In this case I used notes all in a row, see? Those 4. And that's a very typical compound bend that you might hear in a country tune. So have fun bending. I hope you all enjoyed these lessons and learned something, and I'll be back at you with some future lessons. And be sure to send in your requests, what kind of things you'd like me to talk about, to k2music.com.